Peace and love, family. Welcome to another R.E.A.D Book Club discussion. Tonight we are discussing the introduction of The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. And I'm probably, Brother T, you know I'm going to I always butcher the names. The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. I want to say, Brother T, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, by Mehrsa Baradaran. That's how I want to pronounce the name.
Close enough.
You said close enough?
Close enough.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, the Mehrsa Baradaran. We have another person joining the stream, but I don't see her camera on. Peace to you, Sister Bowens.
Hmm.
Sister Bowens, did you mean to join the panel or were you trying to join the discussion via YouTube? You can unmute your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to just join, not the panel, but just a discussion, I guess. So did I click the wrong link?
Yes, you clicked the wrong link. It's
Okay.
all good. I mean, you can
Thank
stay
you.
for the discussion if you want. You can stay on the panel if you want to.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
All right. All right. So anyway, so tonight we're going to discuss the introduction of The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap by Mehrsa Baradaran. Like I said, I'll probably be butchering this. Family, make sure you share the show. Stay for the discussion, even if even if you don't have the book and you haven't read the chapter, still stay for the show. Like I said, we're just talking about the introduction tonight. If you don't have the book, make sure you go out and grab the book as soon as possible, and preferably from a preferably from a black bookstore. Okay, we got to support our black independent stores here in Baltimore, Maryland. We support Everyone's Place. They ship nationally and internationally, and they carry a lot of books that are out of print. I find myself, people come into my inbox and I find myself telling them, call Everyone's Place in Baltimore, in
Hmm.
Baltimore City. They have a lot of books that are out of print. They also have a lot of books that if you go on Amazon, they cost these ridiculous amounts of money, but you can call Everyone's Place and get it for a fair deal. Okay, so try to get the book from a black independent store first. And then join us next week, okay? But like I said, stay for this discussion, even if you don't have the book or haven't read it, because I see some people are going in, they're coming in and they're going out, and they say, "Oh, they're talking about a book that I don't have and I haven't read." But stay for the discussion because I guarantee that you're going to learn something. Go ahead, Brother T, and introduce yourself to the listening audience.
Hello, family. How you doing? It's Brother T. Definitely joining Dr. Ma'at on a number of book recommendations, and this one right here is definitely a good one. We're gonna learn a lot, and I look forward to the upcoming chapters.
And Brother T, thank you so much for recommending this book. I
Awesome.
remember when you and I were reading Blueprint for Black Power. You were very knowledgeable about a lot of things, and you told me you were already reading this stuff. Like
Hmm.
you've already read The Color of Money. You also read The Color of Law, which is going to be the book that we're going to read as a follow up to this book. And so I just want to thank you, T, for recommending this book and other books, because
Yeah.
you come with a lot of good resources. And
You're
so
welcome,
I
sister.
do
I just
I do
appreciate
thank
the
you.
opportunity for us to continue to add this to our understanding, so we can move forward. Because it's definitely like a puzzle, the missing piece that we need for that next step, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Like we have to properly understand the problem, right?
Hmm.
And the problem is complex, but we have to properly understand it so that we can generate viable solutions, right? Like
Yes.
in order, so we can't keep, like, as Dr. Jared Ball was talking about in the myth of black buying power, the myth and propaganda of black buying power. How can we create solutions to these problems if we're caught up in myths and lies? And so,
Hmm.
like you said, we have to increase our comprehension of the problem. All right, so let's jump right into the introduction, family. We won't be long at all. The introduction was about 10 pages, but it was powerful 10 pages of information. So, Brother T, I know how you like to start with like page one. I might jump over somewhere, but
That's
let's go
fine.
ahead and start with page one.
Okay.
What did you get out of page one when you read this?
I definitely like how the authors start off the introduction. I think when reading the book, a lot of people kind of go past the introduction and go straight to the chapter, right?
Yes.
It pays us so much information to go to the introduction, and she started it off with a quote from Martin Luther King, the doctor Martin Luther King. He says, "All too often, where there is a mass unemployment in the black community, it's referred to as a social problem. And when there is a mass unemployment in the white community, it's referred to as a depression," said Martin Luther King in 1968. I think that's so fitting to start off with this part because knowing we're celebrating Martin Luther King Day tomorrow for most United States on tomorrow Monday. So when I read this, I think about what we're going through now, the recession. You know, people say, "Oh, look how the unemployment, look the ability for people not to be able to take care of their homes." Well, this has been going on forever in the black communities. We have been without resources to catapult us in the employment agenda. You know, we've been left out for so many years. So this quote right here by Martin Luther King was absolutely perfect, and it was an absolutely perfect way to start this introduction. So she kind of goes in to show how we are being locked out, and this is one of the ways by us going through unemployment. Look, there's still millions of people unemployed today, 2022, from the last 2 year pandemic. Can you imagine what's going on in our households? And
Mm.
as we find out in this introduction, that when we go, and also the chapters, that there's so many blacks that are unbankable because they cannot even get the benefits of a bank. And as you learn that some people can't even afford to be participants in banking,
Mm.
when it
Mm.
comes down to it, you have to put thousands of dollars inside the bank just to gain interest bearing accounts. And I don't know how many people in the audience and abroad has 20 to 50,000 dollars to just let sit in the bank to produce that 2 to 5% that you may get. So banking, um, in this capitalistic way that we'll learn in this chapter, talks about Thomason's decentralized monetary policy and Hamilton's centralized monetary policy, and what's the difference and who won and what monetary policy we're using today. And that will explain how deep a hole that we're in.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned banks. I love on this first page how the author drives home that banks are the drivers of wealth creation for any society.
Mhm.
And banking policy is integrally tied up with politics and power.
Yes.
So when we think about black banks, right? And so a lot of our elders and even ancestors have encouraged us to put our money into black banks. And let's say that we all did.
Mhm.
We have to understand that our banks are still at the mercy of something else. You get what I'm saying? It's still at the we without political power, our banks could never create the wealth that we would need to sustain ourselves, the wealth that we would need to generate in order to level the playing field. And I hope that I made my thoughts made sense
Very clear.
because we don't have because we lack political power.
Hmm.
And so I was happy that she did drive that home, that it is the banks that are the drivers of wealth creation. So that means that black banks should be the drivers of wealth creation for black people or for the black community. But
Hmm.
if you have a black bank that is segregated from mainstream America, then
Hmm.
how much wealth will this bank be able to generate? And then, like you said, with black people being in being in the economic position that we're in, how much do we have to even put into those black banks?
Most
So
definitely.
anyway, moving on to page 2. Um, It says right here, and he said, she says, pushed out of the main arteries of American commerce, the Black community turned inward and created its own institutions. So she's giving us a little bit of history now. And
Hmm.
she's talking about how after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, Black folks began to build our own institutions because we were locked out. We were segregated. So we said, okay, well, we can't go with them, so let's build our own stuff, right? And he says that she says that the first Black banks were formed less than a decade after slavery ended. Okay, it said that most Blacks could not save or borrow at white banks, so we established our own banks. And then it said the creation of Black ghettos led to a surge in Black banks in northern cities. I want to pause right here. I love that the author said the creation of Black ghettos,
Hmm.
because some people think that Black ghettos, i.e., Black impoverished communities or neighborhoods, just so happened to be. It just happened like that. No, it was intentionally these areas of poverty, Black poverty, were intentionally created. And I want to make sure we drive that point home. Did you want to add anything, Brother T, while I'm
Yeah,
discussing?
well, I'm glad you brought that point that you just drove in because no bank can create wealth for the community if that community cannot hold assets. And that's one thing, you cannot gain any mobility without assets. So once we learned about 10 years after slavery, when the Freedmen Bureau promised allotment of land, but we got a bank instead. The land would gave us ability to hold an asset, which we could have used as leverage to gain wealth. We was given the ability to put money into a bank, which was squandered and stolen from us. Also, not given to a bank that can even multiply through fractional lending that came later through investing. But let's understand how the banking sector impacts in a person's economy, right? This basically came from an article that I read, right? And it says that the
Mhm.
banking sector is an industry and a section of the economy devoted to holding financial assets. Number one, that we was not given the land that we needed, right? So the financial assets wasn't there. For others, and investing those financial assets as leverage way to create more wealth. That was taken from us 10 years after slavery. The sector also includes the regulation of banking activities. Our first bank did not have the regulations needed to protect our
Mm.
deposits. The sector also includes regulation of banking activities by the government agencies. Insurance, was our money insured? Mortgages, we got poor mortgaging loans, predatory, if I may say, investor services, and later on credit cards. This is how the banking sector impacts the economy. So as we learned early on in the first 2 pages, we wasn't even given that opportunity. What we'll get in the third page would be how she explained how when we got the homes, they were put into low income areas, right? Which never grew, never gave us the wealth was needed. The banks had to what? Default, we defaulted on those loans, the banks took away. So what was the opportunity for us to really gain that mobility, right? So that's the point I wanted to bring on.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much, Brother T, for making those points. And so she moves on to talk about different people: Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, President Nixon, and even all of the different Presidents Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama. And she says that these were the people who were proponents of
Hmm.
banking Black. She said that Booker T. Washington said that Black banking was salvation itself. He said
Hmm.
by owning a home, as you just stated, Brother T, and a bank account, that a Black man would eventually find his way to the enjoyment of all of his rights. Martin Luther King exhorted the Black community to take your money out of the banks downtown and deposit your money in a Black owned bank. He said we want a bank in movement. He says Black nationalists uh, To Black nationalists, Black banking was a necessary step toward asserting independence from white society. And that's what I thought, Brother T. So I guess I was on the Black nationalist tip.
Most
Like, we,
definitely.
this is sovereignty. We don't have to depend on them. We can, we can put our money in our own banks. So that was when I read that, I put Me Too next to it with a smiley face. And he says that Malcolm X posed the question, why should white people be running the banks of our community? And I was like, I second that. Why should they run the banks in our community? Says that President Nixon, and Dr. Ball talked about President Nixon in his book, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power.
Mhm.
He said that Nixon threw his weight behind Black banking so that he could oppose controversial desegregation programs and woo white moderates and conservatives unwilling to push any further racial reforms. Presidential Nixon civil rights platform was centered on Black capitalism. He
Mhm.
urged more Black ownership, Black pride, and yes, Black power. It says, but what he meant by Black capitalism was a cheap knockoff of white capitalism. Then lastly, the author, and I believe the author is a female, right?
She is.
She goes on to say that Presidents Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, and Obama disagreed about many things, but they each sought to promote Black banks and businesses through programs called community capitalism, enterprise zones, or minority enterprises. So, Brother T, I thought about how, remember T.I., the rapper T.I. and Killer Mike started
Yes.
talking about taking advantage of opportunity zones. So this would fall in line with that, right?
Exactly. See, that's the thing about it. Now, we look into the chat, and love, loyalty, IBMOR um, stated that the Freeman's Bank was a savings bank,
Hmm.
and it was absolutely right. It wasn't a savings and loan bank. You know what I'm saying? It was ability to put your money in the bank, can gain no interest, because where does fractional come in? Fractional spending come in, right? So that's when people really made money, because the bank was created to take the deposits and also lending it out by gaining interest, and then thus they pay you interest because what I'm saying, you deposit money in. So as he was right, the Freedmen's Bank was a savings bank, and we know today, you can't make it in this world today based off this economy just being a saver. So we were put at a disadvantage right there. It was like it was a little bit more safer than putting your money under the mattress, basically.
Right.
But at least your money was under the mattress and not taken secretly by white bank presidents and um, people on the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the next paragraph actually mentions the Freedmen's, well, it said Freedmen's Bureau, not the Freedmen Banks, but it says the Freedmen's Bureau, for example, initially proposed, and this is what you were talking about earlier, giving Black people land, but instead they gave everyone a bank. And then
Mhm.
the author mentions the New Deal programs. And I know a lot of us, and I remember reading this years ago, that it was President Roosevelt who proposed, the New Deal.
Yes.
Remember they said he was the poor people's president. And so a lot of people went out and voted for him. In fact, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she loved Franklin D. Roosevelt so much she named my father after him,
The teddy
Delano.
bear.
My father's name is Delano, and it's because she loved Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But he was the poor people's president, and he proposed the New Deals. But our author says that the New Deal programs, it said, that would have sent aid to building houses in the urban ghetto were instead used to create white suburbs
Hmm.
that reinforced and perpetuated racial segregation for the rest of the century. So here it is. We were backing, Black people loved President Roosevelt and they were backing him, but his New Deal programs didn't benefit Black people. It
Hmm.
benefited white people. In fact, his New Deal programs hurt the Black community.
What's that? I'm not sure. Was that the Homestead Act, one of his programs?
I don't know what date the Homestead Act was proposed.
Okay. I
So
just
because
want to know.
Franklin was around the 1940s. So when was
Right.
the Homestead Act? I had to Google it.
Yeah.
Was it Brother T? Are you Googling it?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
because you want to know, because these are the programs, as we know that when one of the books that we mentioned some time ago was called When Affirmative Action Was White.
Yes.
And this is one of the times when programs were given to the white population to increase their wealth, increase land ownership, and also increase their wealth. So yeah, so it doesn't say what year. Sorry, it's 1898, so it came sometime.
So it came before. It came way before Roosevelt.
Yeah, it came before Roosevelt, but we'll find out. We'll talk about it next president, next sometime, because it all ties in. Definitely all ties in. These are other programs that were created to give wealth, and we were kind of locked out as usual. And what I wanted to talk about is a decoy response. That's what this wound up being. When black capitalism was pushed, especially by Nixon administration, and as the author talks about, from administrators from that point on, always said, okay, give them the black bank. Now, hopefully that we can understand the decoy, that is the response, because no matter who says it, T.I., Killer Mike, it can be whoever, just understand the first time that was mentioned was when we supposed to got land allotment after the Lincoln administration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the decoy is always, don't give them the wealth, give them the bank. Don't give them the wealth, just give them the job. It's either or. And as she found, and she wanted to make sure she made better points, was that Nixon created this black capitalism to woo the Republican side that he wanted to win over during his election.
Mm. Mm.
So we always got to make sure we don't get caught with the bait and switch. I know it looks good, I know it sounds good, but as we'll learn, that even though we bank and keep it segregated, that money goes all over the world. So it is limited. We spend it in our community, but it leaves our community because the banking industry is centralized. It's not decentralized. It doesn't stay put on 32nd Street. It goes abroad. We think it stays in our community. No, that money, that dollar, and the way that it grows goes abroad. Because at this time, our banks did not have was not the tool to create.
No, that's facts. That's a fact, brother T. That's a fact, and that's why the author said that when you put your money in the black banks, it ultimately gets put back into white hands.
Right.
So that makes, yeah, what you just said made perfect sense. And so I think she talked about that on page 5. And
Yes.
I love how she mentions other immigrant groups, because you know how we always say, well, why can't black people do with the Jewish and the Irish and the Germans and the
Yes.
Asians? Why can't I mean, other immigrant groups did it, but why can't we do it? And so she drives home the fact that they faced discrimination and inclusion, just like we did. But right here she brings it home. She says, but the key difference was that none of them was systematically and uniformly and
Hmm.
legally separated to the extent and for the length of time the black community was. And she goes on to say that these immigrants eventually left the overcrowded ghettos and settled in the suburbs,
Hmm.
um, where through violent zoning restrictions and racial covenants, blacks were barred. Um, I think it was a point of, I don't know if I missed it, but she also talked about how they became white also.
Hmm.
So they became white, and we read about that in the book Birth of a White Nation by Dr. Jacqueline Badalora, how
Hmm.
those immigrant groups, once they were accepted as white and they began to be, once they were accepted as white, they started reaping the benefits of white people. And
Hmm.
then they were able to move out of the ghettos and things of that nature, because now they're white. They have the white status. So I'm glad that she mentioned that. Go ahead, Brother T.
But I wrote on top of page 6 was the one power move is negated. When anytime someone talks about how other groups wind up manifesting in a big economy here in the United States, one thing is negated. They move out of the ghetto. Then, once they move out of the ghetto, they get introduced, right, and get inducted in whiteness,
That's
right?
what it is. Like you said, that's what
Then,
it is.
after they get inducted, then they get all of the benefits that they was once excluded from, right? So it's steps. It's just not that people say, "Oh, yes, the Chinese do it, the Italians do it." You know what? But it's those steps that happen prior to them doing it that we've been locked out. Think about this. Now, I may want not to say this, but I will. If you look at our Nigerian brothers, sisters, we live in Baltimore. Majority of our brothers and sisters live in Prince Georgia County.
That's a fact.
I don't see many. Majority move in big homes, big families down there because it's closer. It's not the ghetto, and a lot more resources are there. The thing is, moving out of that community that has less resources. It's just the way it happens. Everybody has to move out. This is what this lady is saying that we have to examine. Those groups, like the Bank of America, was once called the what? The Bank of what?
The Bank of Italy.
Once the Italians became put into the fabric of whiteness, then the bank no longer felt the need to be called the Bank of Italy. It became the Bank of America because now it can introduce itself in the centralized banking system. Nobody wants to admit that you had to give up that part that made you excluded from the system in order to make it in this system.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And people got upset with, I remember Yvette Carnell saying that you have to be white. We have to become white. And people saying, oh, she's trying to say that black people need to become. I don't think they quite understood what she was saying, because that's true. It's a fact. They had to give that up and had to become white. And once they become white, they were able to, like you said, get into mainstream American, the mainstream. They were able to join the mainstream economy. That's the word that I was looking for. Once they became white, and we were locked out of the mainstream economy, which is why we're in the situation that we're in. And go ahead, Brother T.
Which gave Nixon the idea to say, you know what, they want inclusion. You know, banking has always been that decoy to give them banking. That shows them, don't give them the programs, but give them the banking. Yeah. And even when we were given the programs was supposed to be for the masses, we was excluded. We were locked out. So that decoy, which I said, that was the power move that was always negated. Give them that ability to say, hey, I'm doing it myself without government intervention. And that's one of the biggest things, unfortunately, that it's been continuing being pushed, and we forget. So books like this bring that out so we can at least see it to understand exactly what's happening.
Absolutely. Which makes to me, this book solidifies why reparations, why we should be fighting, for reparations. But you hear black folks say, oh, they're not going to give it to y'all. Why would they give it to you? Blah, 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 blah. But reparations it's no way that we can even the playing field by just pooling our money together, supporting our own businesses and banking black. We would need government intervention, just like with the immigrants. It says right here that the black ghetto and white suburb was created by heavy state well, no, let me not go there. Let me back up a little bit. He said it was the success of immigrant banks should not be misinterpreted. It was not self-help and community support that allowed them to finance themselves out of the ghetto. Because a lot of us think that we can just do that, T. We just, put our money in black banks, start some businesses, pool our money together. And I'm not saying that we can't still do that, right?
We can start businesses, and we can we can put our money into each other's hands.
Absolutely. And so we can do that. But it says right here, because we're talking about their success and where they are,
Mm-hmm.
it says it was not self-help and community support. It says they left the ghetto first, as you talked about, and it said they did so by being accepted as white, not through segregation, not through segregating their money. Then it says the bootstraps they were given were government guaranteed mortgage loans from which black people were excluded, because they quick to tell black people that, oh, our we had to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and
Mm-hmm.
and make it here in America. Well, the author says those bootstraps were government guaranteed mortgage loans, and um, from which we were excluded. And she goes on to say that a government credit infrastructure propelled the growth of the American economy and regulated the ghetto economy to a permanently inferior position. The
Mm-hmm.
government created credit apparatus did not cross the red lines. I know, I'm pretty sure this book is going to get into red lines that policymakers drew around the ghetto, and within the color line, a separate and unequal economy that took root. And so the author then goes on to talk about how there's always been justifications for wealth inequality in the United States. She mentions Christian dogma that held that the white race had a divine right to subjugate the black one, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then science was conscripted to do the dirty work of white supremacy, as social Darwinism held that the race hierarchy was nature's will. She mentions the evolutionary theory and sham science of eugenics that justified the wealth gap in the 19th century. She mentions in the 20th century that economic theory was used to justify the wealth gap. And she says that fundamentalists such as Barry Goldwater and Milton Friedman and Alan Greenspan held that the wealth gap was a natural result of market forces, and that any government remedy was an insufficient market intervention. And then lastly, she says that black capitalism in its subsequent iterations became the modern era's justification for wealth inequality. Okay. And so then she concludes, she says, well, this book is a challenge to the premise, and it lays bare the fact that the hand that drives black poverty, and Brother T, I had to highlight this. This is at the page, the top page, the top of page 7. She
Okay.
says the book is a challenge to the premise, and it lays bare the fact that the hand that drives black poverty is not a natural and invisible one, but rather the coercive hand of the state that has consistently excluded blacks from full participation in American capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so black poverty was created. And
Creative.
there's a lot of problems that ensue from that. As Dr. Amos Wilson taught us in his book, Blueprint for Black Power, he said most of our social problems are tied to our economic problems. And so while we'll sit here, T, and say, oh, it's all, look at the black on black crime and the broken homes, and look at this, and look, all of these things, when you look at the root of them, poor quality schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Poor quality schools, poor communities, violence, drugs, chaos, confusion. We can get into self-hate and all of the. You tie all of that back, it all goes back to our economic condition. Go ahead, Brother
Yes.
T.
Um, this introduction, like we mentioned prior, has a lot of jewels, and you just dropped the whole jewelry store on us right now. You put something on us with by bringing out these points, but she put these things in there for a reason. You just pointed out state by state restrictions, right? That is an example of the decentralized monetary policy that Thomas Jefferson wanted to impose.
Mhm.
And the reason why America became a superpower is because we adapted to Hamilton's centralized monetary system. If you look into what she mentioned, she said decentralized when it states, when you just mentioned how our money is just like, and how the states keep us keep us down, correct? I mean, you did mention that, right?
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson had the decentralized saying that, hey, Virginia can trade with and do work with South Carolina. That's how we keep our money, peer to peer. I need us to be very careful about what we hear today. The same could be our saving grace. Now they say today is decentralized currency, removing ourselves from the centralized base, right?
Mm.
So understand that the decoy exists even today. I'm not saying that decentralized currency will not help. I'm just saying be very wary of the decoys of the past. I always tell my daughter three things to remember when you get a dollar in your hand: past, present, future. Remember what happened in the past if you had any bad spending habits. Remember the future, the present right now, exactly what you need. And remember that you always got to save for the future. So
Mm-hmm.
I say the same thing when it comes down to this information that comes right deep into our bosom when we understanding this information. Remember how they tricked us in the past, so we know how to better suit ourselves in the present, and so we can definitely understand how we can negate and navigate our future because they're tricky. Decentralized monetary policies are being introduced again, just as they say the centralized monetary policies is going to the gutter during inflation. Remember, the inflation right now today is 7%, the highest since 1980s. We are struggling. There's so many blacks that are unbankable who can't even get a bank account. So we locked out even today in 2022. So
Mm.
we have to understand, if we don't understand this history on how we've been locked out, how we've been bamboozled, we will be in trouble. Understand this language that's being used in this book. This book is about 3 to 5 years old, but it stands true today. Look at the monetary system today. Look how we are struggling. Look how many people are unemployed. Look how many people are still using cash checking places to use to cash their checks. Look how many people are not investing. Look how many people don't have the ability to have a home. Look how many failing businesses we have that cannot cross state line, who cannot even think about going internationally. These things still run true today. That's why I think this introduction was so powerful because she introduced a whole bunch of things that we're struggling with in 2022.
That's a fact. That's a fact. And it's nothing new under the sun, brother T,
Nothing.
as you stated. It's nothing new under the sun. They keep pulling the same tricks.
Same
And
trick.
and as long as we're ignorant and as long as we continue to be miseducated, ignorant and miseducated about what's happening, we can never correct our situation. We'll never come out of it. Um, but the reason why I said there's nothing new under the sun, because at the bottom of page 7, she mentions Black Lives Matter. And she said that in 2016, it was this renewed focus on Black banking. She says, but yet the industry is in distress, and mentions the Mechanics and Farmers Bank of Durham, North Carolina. And she announced that this was a bank family that's like the oldest and strongest Black owned bank in the country. And since
Hmm.
1907, it's been financing Black churches, Black homes, Black businesses. It survived the Great Depression. It saved several other Black banks in the process. And so it was also, it says for a century, its insurance affiliate, the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company, was the largest Black controlled business institution in the world. And so she goes on to say that they announced that they were shifting focus from specifically serving the Black community to being just a standard community bank. So again, you had all of these entertainers, brother T, Ti, Killer Mike, and Black Lives Matter. They're like, yes, we gotta put our money in Black banks, and that is the solution. That is the solution to closing the racial wealth gap, self help, and putting our money in our own banks. And here it is, you have one of the oldest and strongest Black banks at this particular time saying, we're getting ready to shift focus.
Right.
So it's just not because the money, like you said, it's not enough because of the color of money. And so once I read this introduction, I said, aha, this is why she titled her book The Color of Money, because of the color of money.
Mm-hmm.
And the color of our money is black. And so when you have black folks' money and you're dependent on black folks' money, you won't be as successful as you would think that you would be if you understood, the
Mm-hmm.
economic condition of black folks. Brother T, did you want to chime in?
No, that you hit the point right there.
Okay.
Because you to explain the color of money to understand that it's green. You know what I'm saying? No matter how it is floating its way right into the centralized money system, and
Mm,
we had to understand that the most of all the things that were given to us had a lot of holes. It was empty promises. So it had so many things that could not help us completely. Yes, putting money in a bank can be helpful, but it has to be able to have a vehicle to move it towards doing something. And majority of us are put out banks. I can be honest. You put your money in once you receive your paycheck, and then it goes out when you pay your bills. And
mm,
not much of that money is left there to invest and to grow. Not saying, but look at statistics. We see that how many make a certain amount on a yearly basis, how many invest, how many have homes, and banks keep record of this also as well. So our money is it's more of a liability to a bank. So the oldest bank, 1907, I think you said, right?
yeah, yes, 1907.
Right? That's over 115, 116 years, something like that.
Yes.
Realized that our money was more of a liability because the money didn't may not have stayed in there long enough for it to even be a benefit to the bank.
Mm,
So it had to change focus. So how can our money start to be a benefit to our communities and stay in there longer, allow it to invest? That's the question. But majority of these things that have been given to us, these programs and these marketing schemes given to our community, really doesn't benefit our community based off because it's empty. It's not enough vehicle, not enough gas to drive the vehicle.
absolutely. Mm. And so at the bottom of page 8, she says right here, and this is what you touched on earlier, noting the striking trend of black bank failures. A recent study linked the epidemic to the deep poverty of the black community. We talked about that. It says, in other words, the very poverty that these banks have been trying to fight for generations is the main obstacle to their survival. But the poverty rut is perpetuated when communities lose access to banks. So then she gives us a statistic. As a group, blacks are more unbanked than any other race. And you said that earlier, Brother T, at the
Mhm.
beginning of the conversation. It says 60% of the black population is unbanked or underbanked, while only 20% of whites are in the same category. What this means is that for blacks, disproportionately this I'm sorry, what this means is that blacks disproportionately rely on fringe banks, leading to a debt trap. And you talked about that, T. Blacks pay higher interest on mortgage and small loans. They pay more fees on basic services than similarly situated whites, and they are taken to court disproportionately by creditors for
Mhm.
small debts. And so then she closes, family, with this. She says, wealth provides. And I thought this was powerful because people always say, why are they talking about wealth? Wealth, creating generational wealth. Well, it says right here, wealth provides a layer of financial security. And this shock absorber is missing for many black families. And we talked about that a whole lot, Brother T, when we discussed the book, The Hidden Cost of Being an African American. And that hidden cost was the fact that African Americans lack transformative assets. And we talked about how without transformative assets, there's certain things that we just can't afford to do. Some of us can't afford to send our children to high quality schools, live in certain neighborhoods, send our children to high quality schools. And then when there is a financial crisis in the family, we don't have an asset that we can say, well, let me go and borrow $40,000 of equity out of grandma's house and use that money to get by. We don't have those assets. And so anyway, She says that the shock absorber is missing for many Black families, especially for families on the bottom rung. Owning a home provides a substantial buffer against the hardest edges of poverty, a stable foundation that can be passed down to the next generation. It can determine whether your neighborhood has decent or failing schools, whether you will be able to go to college, whether you will face eviction, or whether you can meet unexpected costs without having to resort to a payday loan. The benefits of owning a home. And we know, Brother T, as you stated earlier, we a lot of us were prevented from doing that. You said that the we had the I don't want to say fake mortgages, but remember those fake agreements back in the day. The person would act like they, are the mortgage company, and Black people would sign a contract, and really the white person has the they actually have the loan with the mortgage company, and the loan could be 6%, but then they come back to you, they're charging you 12%. And then sometimes Black people paid off the loan and the white folks still wouldn't give us the house. So they played a lot of games with us. And then you had banks who outright said, I'm not going to give Black people any mortgages. So we were prevented from buying homes. And so what this author just did was describe all of the different benefits of having a home. And so anyway, it says, a store of wealth is self-reinforcing, as is its absence. As Billie Holiday sang, them that's got shall get, them that's not shall lose. And so in the conclusion, the author reminds us that when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, the Black community owned a total of 0.5% of the total wealth. And she says what's staggering is that more than 150 years later, that number has barely budged. Blacks still own about 1% of the wealth in the United States. So I had a debate with a pastor maybe about a year or two ago, and he argued me down, Brother T, that Black people have progressed. He said, Dr. Ma'at, think about it. You have a PhD in engineering. You're able to live in this neighborhood. You're doing this, you're doing that. And you trying to tell me Black people haven't progressed. And so, look at these Black people. We have jobs. Basically, we work around white folks. And so that's why we were able, in his mind, we progressed. We were no longer experiencing chattel slavery. So he argued me down, Brother T, that we have progressed. And so his idea of progress was being close to white folks, living in close proximity of white people, working in close proximity of white people, making a certain amount of money. That was
Right.
his idea of progress. And I told him my idea of progress is full and complete freedom, liberation, sovereignty, self-determination. So I'm naming all of the different things. And I said, if we don't have that, we didn't progress, And so just to sit here and read the stat that said that in 1863, we owned around 0.5% of the national wealth, and 150 years later, we're at 1%. Somebody may say, well, Dr. Ma'at, I mean, you go from 0.5 to 1%. That's progress, and so I guess my response to that would be, remember when Malcolm X said, if I stab a man in the back, if you stab a man in the back and then you pull the knife out a little bit,
Yeah.
that's not
progress.
that's not progress. And to me, that's reminiscent of that. When
Yeah.
I hear people say things like that, oh, you went from 0.5% to 1%, shouldn't you be happy, right? And it's like,
Right.
the knife is still there. They just pulled it out maybe a little bit, And so anyway, Brother T, what are your closing thoughts? I know we said we were going to stay on maybe 20 or 30 minutes. It's been like 48 minutes, but what are your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with your sentiments. You know what I'm saying? I'm definitely with the points you made. Um, I just think that when we look at the transformative assets, people still think that, oh, well, we have a lot of millionaires today, and you know, we have a lot of millionaires that did not have money from an inheritance, or didn't have a trust fund, and they fail to realize that some of the things that Thomas Shapiro brought up in the book was that they had a living benefit.
Mm,
They had the ability to get a transformative asset while their parents were still living. So, thus, yes, not everyone receives that transformative asset as a death benefit, but they failed to realize that the money they received while they were living in forms of gifts were given. We have to still understand that the biggest wealth transfer will be happening from the baby boomers into this generation that people are not looking at, and they have to look at the wealth that's coming from what class, what ethnic group of boomers that receive the most, and how much money that they're transferring. And I'm sure it's going to be in the billions. So we have to
Mhm.
look at who's going to benefit from it, um, and then look see what that group can benefit from and what they can do from this day on. But remember that because of those social programs, because of the assets that was able to be transferable, a group is about to benefit from all that those government programs from World War II and beyond. So people have to study to show ourselves approved because it's a lot that we're missing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And shout out to Sister Crystal Denise. She dropped a powerful comment in the chat. She said white supremacy redefines and recreates itself. And if we don't know history, we won't be able to
Yeah.
identify the repetition. That was powerful. And then brother Jeremiah Africa, he said, facts, Dr. Ma'at, the majority of our people have no idea what progress and freedom is. He said, majority think it's comfortably living in Urugu confinement.
Mm,
And that is a fact. And thank you so much, Melissa G, for putting the
yes.
quote that I was trying to articulate in the chat. Malcolm X said, if you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it out all the way out, there's no progress. Progress is healing the wound that the blade made.
The blades.
Ashe,
That's
Ashe, Ashe. All right, family. So join us back here next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be discussing chapter 1 of The Color of Money, Black Banks in the Racial Wealth Gap. Please grab it, family. Grab the book, grab the book. Again, if you do grab the book, grab it from a Black independent bookstore first if they have it before you jump to Amazon. I know Amazon is so convenient. You're like, oh my goodness, let me just order from Amazon. It'll be at my door tomorrow. But if there is a Black bookstore near you, or even if it is not one near you, like I said, you have Everyone's Place here in Baltimore. They ship around the country and around the world. You can call and see if they have the book. And so join us back here again, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next Sunday to discuss chapter 1 of this book. Have a black-tastic week, family. Peace and Black power.